Comcast EBI. I basically, in my everyday work, try to assign value to video programming and predict the impact of specific content loss, whether that's a network or a specific program. I'm also an RLadiesPhilly organizer, where I help plan and organize monthly events related to R and data science aimed at promoting gender diversity in the community.
Okay, thank you, Jessie. And now I think you can take over, Jessie, and I will stop sharing the screen if that is fine, so that we will see the panelists when they are.
Sure.
Yeah.
Just take a quick second and thank our panelists for joining us today. I think we're going to get right into it and ask everybody to introduce themselves one at a time. I'll start with you, Uday. Can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and what your company does?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. So my name is Uday Shukla. I'm the Chief Analytics Officer at Eversana, and Eversana is an organization that does healthcare analytics, but their primary goal and place in the market is to provide insights to our pharmaceutical clients, lead commercialization efforts, and do an end-to-end and provide an end-to-end solution in post-approval drugs. So everything from determining the right patients, the right providers, and looking at the entire life cycle of that therapy as it hits the market. So we are looking for senior data scientists and data scientists. They would be working on large healthcare related data sets along with consumer data sets and apply machine learning techniques. Everything from the standard random forest out to reinforcement learning to deep neural networks, and looking at this data in its totality. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on, Jason, can you tell us a little bit about your team at GoPuff and about yourself?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks. Hi, I'm Jason Rodriguez. I'm data science manager at GoPuff. So I lead the data science team, although I'm here to represent the adjacent data analytics team as well. And also data science is part of engineering, so I can speak to some of those roles, in the breakout session. GoPuff is, aspires to be a global solution for immediate everyday needs. And so we're a retailer that really focuses on e-commerce and really rapid delivery, started by a couple of Drexel students here in Philadelphia, and we're still a Philadelphia-based company. Yeah, I guess that's it.
Thank you so much. Ryan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about Compass Red?
Sure. First, thanks so much again for having me tonight. My name is Ryan Harrington. I lead the data science team at Compass Red. We are a boutique analytics consulting firm based in Wilmington and really try to move our clients along the data continuum, whether that means that they're not storing data and need help with their architecture, infrastructure, just databases in general, or they need predictive modeling, or they need to deploy it somehow, whether that's a dashboard, an insight, or an API. We try to move people along that continuum. We're pretty agnostic in terms of the industry we work in. So whether it's the state or for Wawa or somewhere in between, we're really excited to do that work. I'm very excited that we have a few roles open on the team. So we have a technical project manager, a data analyst, and a data engineer role on the Compass Red side. And Devin mentioned earlier that we spun out a nonprofit during COVID called the Delaware Data Innovation Lab. And so we have a DataLab fellow position who could be a data scientist or analyst or engineer as well. So lots of roles, happy to talk about it. Thank you.
And then Johanna Lena, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Comcast EBI?
Sure. So first and foremost, I'm still relatively new to the corporate world. I got my PhD in astrophysics at Penn and proceeded to get a job at Comcast. I started off as a senior analyst within strategic analytics and EBI at Comcast and have since moved over to the data science team, where I am now a senior data scientist specializing in customer care and .com models. Most of what we do are productionalized models, but sometimes we do just generalized kind of data insights through ML. So that is currently what I do.
Thank you. Anjali, can you tell us a little bit about first of all, just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what your team at Slalom is working on.
Sure. Thanks, Jessie. So my name is Anjali Bansal. I actually lead our master data management and data governance practice. So I sit somewhat adjacent to our advanced analytics teams and visualization teams, but really support those parts of our organization to ensure that as they are starting to use data and explore insights from that they can derive from the data that's available to them, it's really making sure we have a good understanding of what data do we have, what does it mean, and then really how do we use this data compliantly and ethically, so that the outcomes that we're driving from our advanced analytics really do align with what the data is telling us.
Thank you. Dave, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you and your team at RevZilla is working on?
Sure. So hello, everyone. My name is David O'Toole. I lead our customer insights and analytics team. So we have a group of data engineers, data analysts, and scientists, and a team of UX, UI, customer researchers that support our 4 businesses. We've got RevZilla, which was a startup in Philadelphia years ago, selling motorsports through e-com. Cycle Gear, which was an acquisition several years ago, kind of started up in California, mostly based in stores, but has since had a robust e-commerce business, and then how it kind of wraps into Komodo. J&P Cycles, which is more of a Harley e-com catalog business, and Rever, which is a recent acquisition, which is more of a platform for sharing your rides, tracking your rides throughout the motorsports business. We are hiring kind of a mix of data analysts and scientists, one active position right now, and expect more through the summer. We're in the midst of building a team to support a full Komodo business across those 4 brands.
Thank you, Dave. Robert, you're up next. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what your team is working on?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Robert Cheatham. I'm the founder and CEO of Azavia. Azavia is a small company based in Philadelphia. We're about 50 people. We are a certified B Corporation, so the B stands for benefit. We're a mission-driven company, and our mission is around advancing the state of the art in geospatial technology, so things related to place and geography, and then applying that for civic, social, and environmental impact. So we pick and choose our projects pretty carefully. We turn down a fair amount of work, but about half of our work is public sector and local and federal government agencies. And the other half is a mix of nonprofit philanthropies and some commercial work that also relates to doing work for public good. That still covers a pretty broad range of domains, from climate change to water to infrastructure management, elections, and so on. A lot of our recent work has been related to remote sensing, imagery, and Earth observation data from satellites and drones, but we still do a fair amount of work that involves other kinds of geographic data. We have a number of roles right now, not just limited to data science, but around UX design and UX research. We are, it's not quite posted yet, but we're probably going to be hiring for an infrastructure engineer, as well as some other roles that you can see on our career site.
Thank you. And last but not least, Steve, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work at Elastic?
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Jesse. Thanks for having me and for all your time, everyone that joined. I'm looking forward to hearing from the other folks on the panel and getting to meet as many people that joined tonight as possible. So thanks for coming. I work at Elastic. Elastic is a search company that makes the free and open source Elasticsearch search engine. We also make specialized software products built on top of Elasticsearch for information security, which includes anti-malware protection products and network intrusion detection systems. That's where I work. I'm the team lead for the security data engineering team, where we build and operate data analytics systems to train machine learning-based malware prevention systems. So we're working to find and stop the kinds of threats that unfortunately you read in the newspaper every day, like ransomware attacks that shut down critical infrastructure, nation state hacking, data theft, and many other things. My team is built from diverse technical backgrounds, from DevOps, we're part data science, part security research, from consulting and academia and many other places. And the thing that really brings us together on the team is our shared passion for building software that learns from data to protect people from cyber attacks. A couple of things that are distinctive about Elastic and our team and the rest of the company as well is that we're globally distributed and been working this way since the company was founded in 2012. So there are about 2,500 employees globally. About 30 of them are in Pennsylvania. Our security, data science, and engineering teams are spread across the US, Canada, and Western Europe mostly. We're also really big supporters of free and open source software. Most of our code is open. We encourage all of our employees to contribute to open source products and get involved in the local tech community. So looking forward to meeting and chatting with all of you. And I'll mention we're actively hiring for data scientists, machine learning engineers, data engineers, and many other engineering positions too, if you're interested in something else. So happy to chat about all those things.
Thank you so much, Steve. I am going to circle back to you, Uday. Can you tell us, well, you mentioned that you were hiring for chief data scientist. Can you tell us, senior, excuse me, data scientist. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're evaluating experience and what kind of skills you're looking for in a candidate?
Sure. So in a candidate, we don't really focus on the data science part. We focus on the fundamentals, the foundational education and experience that a person has. So what we've found that works well is folks that are really strong in math. They're able to solve problems. They're able to investigate and look at optimization techniques. Degrees such as engineering, physics, astrophysics, computer science, mathematics, bioengineering sometimes. Those are types of skill sets and specialties we look for. And then we can train them and convert them into data scientists because we need that inherent curiosity about data, the inherent problem-solving skills, and to kind of dig into a problem and to solve it. Because we know that you always hire for the future. We know that the data sources will change. We know that the complexity of the problems are getting higher and higher. So we hire folks who can grow in technical skill, expertise, and be able to solve tomorrow's complexity. And those complex problems we'll face tomorrow.
Thank you so much. Jason, circling back to you, can you tell us a little bit about the roles that you are currently looking for at GoPuff and what skills you're looking for?
Sure. I guess I could speak to. So currently there are a huge number of roles open. I posted a link to the GoPuff careers page in the chat. But GoPuff is really rapidly expanding. I mean, we got some funding at the end of, let's see, I guess it was the end of last year, like huge amount of funding. I mean, I feel like the organization is like doubling in size, and just the engineering team. So we're looking for a lot of things. We're building out I guess the current like really high priority positions right now are we're looking for senior data analysts to support basically our customer analytics and also for strategic initiatives. And then also we're looking for like BI analysts. These are people that basically create dashboards to support product and and business teams throughout the organization, primarily focused on Looker, I guess, development of like Looker reports in particular. I would say that the things, so I can speak on those positions are really hired through a neighboring team, which is the data analytics team. And they're very focused on having people, bring in people with I think tool experience. So we use technology called DBT. We kind of currently migrated into Snowflake, and we are using and we create Looker reports. And so there's this concept of like data modeling. I think that's critical for creating, basically set up like, I guess, kind of like abstract, data models. Essentially, they're going to support a wide variety of reports, and they're going to be maintained. And I would say like that's a kind of a critical skill that those positions are all kind of looking for. And I guess for the senior data analyst and customer and strategic roles, I think it's someone who has a combination of like a good analytical understanding, but also is fairly proactive and has a good understanding of just kind of like business in general. And I know, and I guess data science right now, we are paused, but I think we're going to pick up hiring in the near, probably towards the end of the year. And data science in the near term is really looking for, I guess, senior data scientists to kind of really fill out the breadth of the organization. I mean, data science applied to GoPuff, there's like a whole bunch of, there's operations, making sure that we have like the sufficient inventory in each of our locations. basically how we move inventory like throughout our distribution center in 2 locations. There's like this whole like optimization process that needs to occur. And also there's a bunch of, will be a bunch of openings in search and recommendations to support modern e-commerce, modern e-commerce company like us. And I think for the most part in those early roles are going to be more people with the specific subject matter expertise. Some of these problems I think are well established, and I think in the near term we'd be looking for people with some significant experience like solving these like typical e-commerce problems, and then later on maybe some more junior folks, maybe stuff folks that could be like learn, I guess, to be that next the principal data scientist kind of the future, I guess. So thanks for the
thank you, Jason.
Response. Yeah.
Ryan, I know you mentioned there's a couple of different kinds of roles you're looking for. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're evaluating experience and what kind of skills you're looking for, if it's specific tooling or anything else like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to echo what Uday said before. To me, I feel like curiosity is like the #1 trait in terms of soft skill that we're looking for. And any way that you can demonstrate that, I'm excited to see it. And I just want to pair that with grit. I feel like very frequently the types of data problems we're solving, you might not figure out how to solve it the right way the first time. And so it takes the ability to fail a few times, go back and solve it again. And so any way to demonstrate those 2 things throughout your resume, regardless, or full application, never mind a resume, regardless of what position we're hiring for, I'm really excited to see that. Really specifically, if I'm looking at like the data engineering side, similar to what Jason mentioned, we're looking a lot at Snowflake, at DBT. We're seeing a lot of our clients moving towards those pieces, but we do feel like we can, if you come with the base set of skills, we can teach you to use them. So we're just looking for curious people with grit. In terms of evaluating experience, to me, it comes down to, can you explain the projects and the choices that you've done? And a less experienced person typically struggles with that, and a more experienced person is better able to do that, regardless of where you're at. So yeah, a lot of different ways to do that depending on the roles though, for sure.
Awesome, thank you so much. I like that, curiosity and grit. That's really good soft skills to have. Johanna Lena, can you tell us a little bit about some of the roles at Comcast EBI, how you are evaluating experience, and just out of curiosity, do you think that having an advanced degree like a PhD is necessary for some of the roles at Comcast?
Yeah, sure. So there's 2 roles in particular that I'm very familiar with, in part because I have had them both. So that's going to be within strategic analytics. There's all kinds of analyst positions. And so in particular, I was a senior analyst. For that job in particular, no, you do not need to have an advanced degree. If I'm speaking very truthfully, I utilize that as a stepping stone to get me to where I'm at now, both the position and my degree. But in terms of skills that you need for those kinds of jobs, the biggest thing is, again, I'm going to echo the same thing Ryan just said, that curiosity, I think, is something that really stood out to me in terms of recognizing what people were interested in when they were interested in me for these roles. And then what I see currently even in like the data science realm and within the strategic analytics realm of jobs at Comcast, that ability to try something and fail is something that's not necessarily a bad thing. You need to try things because you're never going to get it right the first time. And if you are, wonderful, great, fantastic. But especially as problems get more and more complex, especially as you move from like, well, let's try a simple thing to something more complex, those kinds of skills are incredibly important. So Ryan, hats off to you. That's the correct thing to say, in my opinion. But then in terms of data science roles, particularly within Comcast, an advanced degree is more or less required. So at least a master's degree, ideally a PhD. It just kind of comes with that territory. So if you're interested in those kinds of jobs, I don't necessarily think it's going to be a disqualifier. Especially if you come with prior experience. And so a big thing that I look for is I want to know that like you can code first and foremost. That's a huge thing. And then I want to know that you're familiar with how to evaluate your model, how to build a model. If you have experience in productionalization, But again, from my own hiring experience, I can say I had no idea how to productionalize a model, and I was able to learn it. And showing curiosity, showing the ability to learn quickly are things that I look for in any candidate, particularly when we're looking at like interns too. I want to know that you're excited. I want to know that, like, you know, learning about the telecommunications business is interesting. And then something I think is really important too is building on that curiosity is, well, how do we get these products into your home? Like working for Comcast, how does the internet get into your home? And I think that's a big plus. If a candidate comes in and says, hey, like, I'm curious about this process, can you tell me more about it? Because that also will show that you're going to drive to make sure you know the data and know how to use it so that you can actually utilize that data properly and well.
Thank you. I think you set us up pretty well to move on to Anjali, since you work with so much data and you're looking for a lot of data specific roles and really understanding, I assume, what that data represents and how to use it ethically. Mm-hmm. How do you evaluate a candidate for those kinds of skills and that kind of ability?
So a lot of the evaluation that my team specifically performs is really in understanding the way candidates think, right? So when posed questions around, the usage of data or the interpretation of data, it's really understanding, does this person have a data forward mindset? Do they understand how we can drive outcomes using data? And then, how are businesses actually using that data as well? And I think one of the things that's just been a key to success, especially for any candidate at Slalom, not just within my practice, is the desire to learn and flexibility. I think Ryan had mentioned it earlier, was just, we can teach we can teach kind of specific skill sets around technology, but you have to come in with that core foundational basis. So, for example, my background is in MDM, Master Data Management. I'm extremely familiar with a proprietary solution that my previous organization built and took to market. However, using that kind of foundational understanding of what data is and what master data management truly means, I'm able to actually leverage other tooling that's more broadly available in market. And that's really the approach that we take to evaluating and onboarding additional candidates as well, is, what is your data literacy and data maturity and skill sets in those areas? And are you flexible to learn more? Are you, and especially as a consulting firm, we work with actually a number of my fellow panel members here across various industries. So it's really, are you flexible in understanding and learning the kind of unique requirements across, say, media and telecom versus retail versus life sciences and healthcare as well?
Thank you so much. Dave, can you tell us a little bit about the roles that you're looking for, what kind of experience you're looking for, especially if it's any kind of specific tooling, and how you're evaluating those skills?
Sure. So we're looking for kind of a mix of a data analyst / data scientist, and I think that will continue in our world. We look for people that wear many hats, and I think there's obvious themes developing here, and I certainly agree with all of them. The biggest thing is curiosity. I think when you're able to show that you're curious, show some passion for the data that you're working with, even like, I guess my dream, which I haven't actually seen yet outside of the UX researcher world, is for someone to come in with a portfolio of side data projects that they're working on, with a website that explains a problem statement that they were working through, a data set that they have, and some, whether it's models or descriptive statistics, and an explanation of what it means and how they were curious about answering various questions from that data. That's my dream interview to get to someday. It hasn't happened outside of maybe a few interns so far, but I think it's a great opportunity. And like, if you work with UX or researchers, that's the standard. And I feel like we'll get there with data science. But that curiosity with problem solving, that is essential. I think every resume that comes across usually has some sort of Python, SQL baseline, but it's how can you translate that into things that the business can action and get people to do something with.
Thank you. Robert, I'm going to ask you a very similar question, especially since you're in geospatial. Can you tell us a little about the roles that you're looking for, and are there specific tools in that domain that somebody would need to have applying for a role in your organization? And how do you evaluate experience?
Sure. I'll say that about half of Azavia is software engineers, and the other half is a mix of UX designers, data scientists, project managers, and so on. And I think for all of these roles, we consider most or all of these roles fairly technical. So we're certainly looking for people with an interest in technology. We aren't particularly worked up about degrees or credentialing. We feel like a software engineer with a computer science degree is a good thing, but not necessarily required. I'm a self-taught developer. I have a landscape architecture and Japanese language and literature background. It's not obviously prepare me for being a software developer, but we feel like people can gain those skills through a lot of different life experiences, and school is just one of them. I think the things we tend to be looking for are a mix of mission alignment and values alignment. So from a mission perspective, we're looking for folks who are excited about the specific work that we do, the climate change projects that we're engaged in, the wildfire analysis, or opportunity to do work in low-income countries with the World Bank, or this sort of thing. So that's pretty important for us. And as a B Corporation, we tend to attract people who have that specific mission interest. In terms of values alignment, some folks have talked about this in terms of curiosity. For us, we're looking for people who are learners. We don't particularly expect people to have had any geospatial data background or to have learned a particular language. What we're interested in is people who learn deeply about the things that they take on, and a willingness to continue that learning process, a real hunger for it on an ongoing basis. Lots of ways to demonstrate that. And we're looking for people who are interested in operating in terms of a spirit of public service. We describe that as wanting to deliver more value than we capture. So we are a for-profit business, and we have to be in business, but we want to deliver more than we capture from our customers. That includes sharing what we do through open source projects. That includes sharing what we do through writing and speaking. And we want people who operate in the spirit of that.
Thank you, Robert. Uday, I'm circling back to you again. I kind of want to ask you for some suggestions that you might have, some tips that you could give the audience as they are looking for jobs, maybe even applying with your company. What can you tell them about, what can you suggest to them to help them through the process?
Sure, and I think a lot of the other panelists have kind of stated some of these concepts and ideas. Is show a passion for this domain and show the underlying problem-solving curiosity. And if you're coming from a different domain, highlight the relevance of that. So, for example, people who worked in the defense space, they deal with a lot of data. People who worked in other domains, whether it's telecom or other domains, they've dealt with other complex problems that they've had to solve. And how did you actually solve them? And that's really relevant in our space, in the healthcare domain space, which is evolving quickly, given the current situation of COVID and all the other data assets that are becoming more and more available. So that ability to kind of dig into a problem and to make a solution and to deliver a solution. And I think that is really key in terms of how to kind of work through and apply to positions at Eversana.
Thank you so much. Jason, can you tell us a little bit, same question, what kind of suggestions do you have for the audience today if they're applying for roles, especially within your own company?
Yeah, sure. So I would say, I mean, I guess just recognize that, there's a lot of applications coming into GoPuff, and between, the applicant and the hiring manager is a recruiting process, a recruiter who basically collects some guidance from a hiring manager. And they're not necessarily a subject matter expert in data science or in data analytics, but they're basically applying some rules that they basically have, I guess, providing some, like taking some guidance from the hiring manager and kind of applying it to a set of resumes. So that means that, there's a lot of situations where resumes maybe don't contain, so essentially what they end up doing is looking at the job description, and maybe they don't get a lot of really strong guidance from the hiring manager, and then they just kind of compare the job description to the application and to your resume. So basically you want to make sure that every time you submit a resume, think of that as like, an application. You basically need to cater the content of your resume exactly to the requirements as specified in the job description. Fundamentally, maybe the hiring manager could see something very different and kind of understand that you were working maybe in some domain and doing some kind of analytical stuff, and it applies to the kind of problems that the hiring manager is faced with, but it might not be clear to the recruiter. So I would say the first and probably most important thing is just make sure that there's a good alignment between the stated job description, including technologies, and just make sure that you highlight those in your resume. And that might mean, basically rewriting good chunk of your resume, 75% of your resume, to make it, to basically address the kind of points that people emphasize in those job descriptions. So, and it probably also helps to, if there is some information that you think might be in the job description or should be there, to kind of emphasize that. I think that's really important. I would say, so, and make sure that also you don't rely on, if you are doing like like let's say your experience is kind of like in the financial services and you're applying a job in retail, like in GoPuff. One thing you might tend to rely on the kind of jargon of financial services. People just do this. They rely on kind of like the standard way in which they describe analytical work and sort of technical work, and maybe even incorporate specific technologies, in their resume. But if somebody's not familiar with those technologies, like if you're changing industries, it's going to be really hard for them to understand, like, your technologies, the ones you have on your resume, and the overlap with the hiring manager's like favorite technologies. So you have to basically just make sure to spell out what those things are, use more general language, especially when it's not exactly within the same industry. And I think that's probably like the most important thing, just to get through that first screening process. But anyway, so I'll leave it there. I'm sure others will have other great advice too.
That was really good. Thank you. Ryan, you brought up the grit and curiosity that I think seems to have become the theme of the panel today. So I'm going to ask you specifically about that. How do you think that somebody can demonstrate that, either in their resume or just in the interview process, that kind of grit and curiosity?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the curiosity side, one great way to do that is certainly through side projects, actually. It's not the only way, and I don't want to tell someone you absolutely 1000% have to do it, because people have lives and other things going on, but it certainly helps. I've always found that through someone's side project, if you're doing something you're passionate about, I learn a lot more about you, whether it's about the analytics that you care about, or just like what you care about as a person, just simply by what you're selecting. And the reality is, I'm hiring a person. I'm not hiring a machine who codes. I want to know who you are. And so that helps a lot. Another way for both of those things that you can tell me about it is by telling, like grit and curiosity, is by telling me about your failures and how you overcame them. I briefly mentioned that before, but that's something we actually almost directly ask people. Tell me about a time that you failed doing an analysis, a mistake that you made. How did you identify it? And how did you fix that problem? And it's not the only way we assess it, but that tells me a lot about you based upon how you think about that answer. So I really appreciate when people can be self-reflective and honest as they're saying that, not giving the polished interview answer necessarily, like having that moment of vulnerability. And that tells me a lot about who you are.
Thank you. Johanna Lena, similar question. What do you feel like you can offer the audience today in terms of some suggestions or tips as they're applying for EBI at Comcast?
So something for me that I think about a lot is whenever I write a cover letter in particular, I always try and say, okay, how can I tailor this to what the job is asking for? So very much similar to what Jason was saying, with the resume, I think with a cover letter, you can do a similar thing as well. There's a little bit more room to add more to it. And so how can you point out that company, point out something in particular about the job description that says, like, I love this thing, or this is something that's really important to me, to kind of just show that you care a little bit more. But the other thing for me is I like someone who asks questions. Like, I want you to ask me a bunch of questions in an interview. And to me, that shows that you care. You're really trying to see, like, is this a good fit for me? How do you deal with these problems? How do you go about your process? Questions are super awesome. They immediately demonstrate curiosity, immediately demonstrate, to me at least, a certain amount of grit, because you want to know everything. And so I think that's something that's super important to always do. And personally, I believe that got me in the door at Comcast.
Thank you. Anjali, I'm going to ask you a similar question. What advice do you have for the audience today as they're applying for various data engineering, data science roles, maybe even at Slalom?
Yeah, so I mean, really very much echo a lot of the things that that have already been shared. But one of our core values at Slalom is really around celebrating authenticity. So, we really want to see somebody's authentic self, as they go through the application process, the interview process, and then in their day-to-day work lives as well. Robert had mentioned kind of his unique path to where he is, and I think we all have kind of unique paths and stumbles along the way. So really being able to highlight those and celebrate those, I think, are also very important to the success.
Thank you. Dave, can you tell us a little bit about I want to bring up specifically those side projects. Is there a specific kind of, like, either blog or GitHub repo, or maybe even like a tutorial or something that you're looking for, something that you think would really, do you have any advice for how somebody applying at your company could put together a good portfolio, basically?
All of those work. I think any of that initiative will show, it'll come across, laid out like you were presenting to the CEO of a company, of, like, keep it to the point. How do you bring out visualizations that explain a model or some analysis that you did? Leverage your passions. It doesn't have to be something that's retail related. It could be, if you love sports, do something with sports data. I mean, there's so much free open source data out there in every pocket, that whatever you have a passion about, go do that, and I think it'll shine. Use it to learn something new, whether you're learning Python or learning AWS Comprehend, whatever it might be. I think it'll come across in what you do and then how you show it. And another part, I don't know if everyone feels the same way about this as I do, but I do appreciate, I do think it stands out when people catch me on LinkedIn. So if they know that we're hiring in analytics, feel free to drop me a line on LinkedIn. Even if someone doesn't reply, that's okay. It doesn't hurt you, in my opinion. And it, like, especially if you're going to share a link to something, like, go check this out, I will always click through. Receiving a note on LinkedIn for a position is very different than someone trying to send me something.
Yeah.
There'd be more ignores there.
Robert, same question to you. What advice do you have for the audience today for how they can get their resumes seen, get ahead? Specifically, I want to ask you specifically, what are some ways that people with less experience might be able to demonstrate their curiosity, their ability to learn?
I think because we are really interested in people who are interested in our mission and our specific work, I think some of the suggestions earlier would align with Xavier. Like, have you taken a look at our website and looked at our projects? Have you taken a look at some of our open source projects? We probably publish 300 or 400 open source projects on GitHub. And do you have questions about them? And can you that reflect the fact that you've taken a look and thought about them? it is great to see people that have their own GitHub accounts and have contributed to open source projects. That's not always possible based on people's either the time that they have or the past work that they've got, but it's a plus. We love to see people who've put in time that's volunteer work. It may not even be related to technology, but it's a demonstration of the fact that someone cares about some kind of public benefit or public value. I'm trying to not to narrow my comments to data science and data analytics specifically, but these things kind of apply to a lot of different roles at Azavea. And then on learning, I mean, a lot of interviewing is about telling stories. So can you tell me stories about how you have faced a significant challenge and had to do a prodigious amount of learning quickly in order to solve that challenge, or you had to invest in a new skill? It may not even be a programming language or a technology skill per se, but how you dived into that and talk about how you motivated yourself and acquired that skill in order to meet the challenge.
Thank you. And again, last but not least, by any means, Steve, can you offer the audience some advice today for any advice that might help them as they're interviewing and applying, maybe even at Elastic?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for asking. Two things that I recommend folks as they kind of go into interviewing, anywhere, but it's especially top of mind for me when I'm talking to candidates. The first is to be really upfront about what you know and what you don't. I think that it's like, you should totally be proud of your past accomplishments, where you're skilled, but don't feel compelled to oversell your skill set. This is especially true in the area of data science and engineering, just kind of a lot of things we're talking about. It's such a huge space and there are so many different domains that no one's an expert in everything. And so you can totally go in feeling confident that that's true, right? There's going to be some things you know about and some things you don't. I really appreciate when candidates are forthcoming about areas where they don't have a lot of experience, because it's a great opportunity for us to talk about their interests, where they want to learn and grow. And it oftentimes just spurs a really interesting discussion. On the other hand, it's a huge red flag for me, and it can really doom a candidate if I get a sense that they're misrepresenting their skills. So I think you should really just own the things that you love and are proud about, but also be really forthcoming about the things that you don't know. Kind of similarly, the second thing I'd mention is come in prepared to talk about your career goals. Like, what excites you about coming to work in the morning? What are you hoping to learn? That's a huge part of the interview process for me as a hiring manager, is learning about the interests of the candidates, what motivates them, to see how that kind of fits in with the companies and the company goals, what we're hiring for. So if you as a candidate have a really clear answer about what you're trying to achieve in your career, whether it's a specific kind of role or a technology or a skill set or a mission, and really it could be many different dimensions. That's something that's really interesting to talk about. And there's many times that I've interviewed someone for my team and learned that their interests and passions really fit with another team at the company. And I introduce them there and they move into that team as well. So you can kind of get me to work for you if you can come in with some of that information, because I can also help either place you in the right place on my team or somewhere else in either my company or possibly somewhere else as well, once I've kind of learned about you. So that's something that I'd recommend people think through a lot before they come in, so that they can have some answers there and just help me get to know you. That's something that I really look forward to in any kind of interview cycle.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for your answers. I am going to throw a curveball at you, and I am going to move on to the questions from the audience, and I'm going to ask you to use the reaction button down below and raise your hand if this question pertains to you or you'd like to answer it. Sound good? Awesome. All right. So first question from the audience. Can you go over what an interview for a data analyst or scientist role is like? Are there levels of different interviews, meaning like multiple tiers or segments? Johanna Lena, I saw your hand first. Oh, and I missed a part, one more. And are there coding tests as well? Johanna Lena, you want to kick us off?
Yes, they do. There are multiple levels and there is a coding test, usually for anything data science and usually to an extent, at the very least, data analyst. At least that's been my experience. And so generally how it works is you first kind of get like a screen with a hiring manager. They usually call you. Then you move on later to, at least with Comcast, it's been a director. And you talk with the director, kind of they get a feel for who you are, what your skills are. From there, there's usually some kind of coding challenge, analysis challenge. You're usually given some data and they'll say something like analyze this data or build us a model. Sometimes you'll even get SQL challenges. I've even had probability challenges. And so there's usually some aspect of that. And then if you pass that, you generally have what my experience again is an on-site interview. Sometimes they'll go over your technical, sometimes they won't. And then usually on that on-site interview, you meet several different directors and also several people who would otherwise be your peers to kind of get a sense of who are you, would you fit, can we throw you some curveball questions, but also does your personality mesh? And that's generally my experience with interviews. And then if you make it, you get an offer.
Awesome. Thank you. Robert, same question.
Yeah, we actually have posted a page on our career site about interviewing at Azavia. So folks may be interested in taking a look at that. It's at careers.azavia.com. But most of our interviews follow a similar pattern. There's some kind of application review process. In general, a team makes a hire. So the hiring manager is usually either project manager or engineering lead on a team. Members of that team are reviewing resumes together. And while our people operations team is there to support and do the logistics part, you're not and answer any questions you might have about the process. They're not really part of the selection. Following an application review, a subset of people will go to a phone phone interview. So that'll usually be with 2 members of the team. Then from there, there'll be a quote unquote on site. Over the last year. They haven't been on site, obviously, but it's a more extended process and it may be broken up into 2 or 3 sections. If you make it to that sort of in-person process, you may have a couple of interviews with different people. We'll also ask you to do some kind of presentation to which the entire company will be invited. So our goal is not to, we're a small company, so there might only be 20 or so people there, but we want to learn more about people, and we're not asking you to talk about your professional work necessarily, but we're interested in how you talk about things you do and things you care about. And it's usually short, like 15 or 20 minutes, and then a chance for people to ask questions. And it's really a chance for other people in the organization to get to know the person a little bit. And then from there, we would usually make an offer.
Awesome, thank you. I actually like that idea of meeting the whole company. Seems like a little bit good for the interviewee as well, to meet everybody and get a sense of culture and vibe. I'm going to ask the next question. What advice do you have for a non-traditional candidate to help them stand out in the screening or interview process? Steve, you're up first.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk a little bit about this. It's kind of a 2-part answer. The first thing is to reinforce, I think, what Jason was talking about earlier in terms of how you build your resume. There's an important practical reality to recognize for the way that most companies do hiring, and that's that there's a good chance that the first person that sees your application will not be the hiring manager. Usually like you can try to sometimes get there through LinkedIn messages or otherwise, but most companies will have recruiting teams that are helping work through that. So it is important to keep in mind that you should make sure that you have enough kind of standout in your resume to match the job posting, so that it's clear to some of the folks that are helping in HR and recruiting teams that you do have some qualifications that would match. So keep that practical reality in mind as you're building your resume, and read through the job posting ahead of time, regardless of what kind of background you're coming from. That said, kind of the second part is something that is really, really helpful for really any kind of candidate to stand out, but especially a non-traditional candidate, is a customized cover letter. very few candidates actually customize their application in any way to the company they're applying for. And so that's a huge way to differentiate yourself really early on, is to explain a little bit about what your non-traditional background is and why you think that's actually really interesting and would make you a good fit. And another aspect to bring into that, into your application, either as a cover letter or part of your resume, is doing some research on the company ahead of time and including your knowledge of the organization in the way that you do your application. Including some of that context there about how you looked into the company ahead of time, learned a little bit about it, and then used your knowledge there to kind of help explain why you think you would be a good fit and what you're bringing to the table, will make a huge standout difference if from the folks that are going to be reviewing your application to kind of bring you into the interview process. So kind of two things in mind. The first is kind of practically make sure that you have enough content in your resume to kind of match up with some of the pattern matching that recruiters are going to be doing. And then include customized content in the cover letter or in the resume that really matches the organization that you're applying to.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. Johanna?
Yeah, so I'm going to consider myself a slightly non-traditional, but you're probably meaning something very different. But that's fine because I think this advice holds throughout. Something that I tried to make sure that I did when I was in the job searching realm was to say, okay, well, how can I talk about astrophysics but make it about business? And so something that I would do is I said, okay, well, I modeled galaxies, and something that was really important to what we were doing was saying, okay, well, sometimes when we fit a galaxy, it's truly not physical as to what's actually going on. So that would be overfitting. So I'm very familiar with overfitting, how it can be problematic, how it can, give you results that aren't actually true to what's going on. So trying to shift how you talk about things to make it more generalizable, even if you come from a very specific background that seemingly has nothing to do with what you're applying for. So trying to do that, and then also sell yourself. If you're coming from academia, you're already someone who's super curious, you're a learner, you care about what you're doing, you're the kind of person that can laser focus on something. And I think that that's a really important skill to highlight. And I mean, again, this is my personal experience, but anything that you do, try and see if you can shift your view a little bit to match what the company wants from you.
Yeah. I'm going to move on to the next question and ask if anyone can talk a little bit about specific problems you at your company, your team is trying to solve. Awesome. Robert?
I alluded to a few earlier. I would say that while everything we do is geospatial, and in recent years we've had some significant increase in work that's related to Earth observation and remote sensing, the specific kinds of problems we're solving tend to be complex, have some kind of decision support element to them, meaning we're building tools to help other people make better decisions, and have some kind of impact in the public interest. Some specific examples are wildfire risk modeling for the U.S. Forest Service to enable members of the public to understand wildfire risk in their community. Working with the World Bank around urban tree canopy in low-income countries in Africa. Working to build a global transparent supply chain for the apparel industry in order to improve worker conditions in low-income countries, and then releasing that as open data and open source. Working with the city of Philadelphia's water department around their green stormwater infrastructure program. Those are a few examples.
Those are great. Dave, you want to take it next?
Sure. One thing would be around customer behavior drivers. So, for example, this would help our team members working in our 160 stores across the US. What should we focus on to drive a higher value customer longer term? And there's only like, let's say, a finite amount of time that an associate in the store can do something. with a customer, whether that's capture a certain data element from them, like an email address, or encourage a certain item, or encourage a certain segment of product, collect information from them about what they're shopping for. And then kind of similarly online, where there's tons of behaviors that we can model out and build customer attributes about what people do, but then prioritizing what are the most influential things that are going to drive longer term value, so that we can prioritize efforts, because there's only so much capacity by various teams to go after things. How do we get to those top 3 things we ought to be doing?
Awesome, thank you. All right, we'll move on to the next question from the audience. COVID has highlighted that women tend to sacrifice jobs in order to take over the caregiver role in the home sometimes. So as hiring managers, do you have any recommendations on how women can address that gap, or men can address that gap in their work experience? Dave?
Sorry, I have to.
No worries.
I have a dog problem that I have to resolve. Sorry.
No worries, Robert. We'll go to you.
Sorry, I don't want to dominate the conversation, but I do think that, I mean, we run into this with both men and women who are caregivers, who have gaps in their resume, and I think I would just be really straightforward about it. I would, I mean, it's for us. I think it's not uncommon, and I think it's a good thing to have an open, straightforward conversation about it. What I think you can do to help mitigate it, particularly if the gap is several years long, which I think for caregivers may not be unusual, is to talk about what you use that time to, how you stayed on top of your profession, how you continue to grow, how you continue to learn, and mitigate the concern, not so much that there was an employment gap, but that there might have been a period where you weren't investing in your career growth and learning.
There's a follow-up question I will add on to this as we talk about it. So how can independent projects, for example, on GitHub, measure up for that gap in the work experience? Anjali? Was your hand raised? Did I see that?
My hand was raised for the first part. I'm probably the least technical person on this panel.
How can women, how can women or anyone who has been taking care of family members at home over this last year, how can they make up for that work gap in their resume?
Well, I mean, I think Dave just kind of lived it out for us live in real time, and just being authentic and honest about what's going on, and you know, the need to prioritize resolving the current situation, and then coming back to the work life. So a lot of it really is very much echoing what Robert said, was, you know, being honest about what what the situation is, and where that gap occurred from. But then also, you know, how did you use that time? What did you learn, and where can you apply the things that you've learned, whether it is professionally related, or, you know, even just around time management and prioritizing things in your life. How can you apply that when you come back to the workforce as well, and kind of having a story around that?
Thank you. Dave, anything to add on?
No, I think that covered it well. I certainly, any explanation, being authentic of why, if you have the opportunity, not that this would be a requirement depending on the situation, to like spend some time learning during that period too, and what it was, and explaining that. I think that's a great way to demonstrate.
Awesome.
One thing, if I could add to Jesse about that, which is I totally agree with folks saying that to explain that situation when you apply. I for one, as a hiring manager, wouldn't put expectations on somebody that they had been also kind of working on the side on some other project while being a caregiver. Like, that's a full-time role, and so I think that it's absolutely fair that you should expect an employer to recognize that. I'm assuming for this kind of question that this is a situation where someone may have a lot of relevant qualifications and work experience, but then took a break and is coming back. In that kind of case, I think you can very quickly start off on the right foot in an application by doing some of the things you were talking about earlier in terms of researching the organization, showing some of that curiosity early on. Like that's something you don't have to spend months doing, making a GitHub repo, but you can spend a few minutes doing before applying or before an interview. And if you come out with really interesting questions about the company and your kind of thoughts on the organization and the role, I think you'll be in a great spot to kind of move forward with an interview. So I just wanted to mention that I wouldn't say that I think people need to put pressure on themselves to go and like do side projects and other things during that time in order to justify any kind of work gap. I think hiring managers should be very understanding of that.
Thank you. So I'm going to move on to the next question. Who in your company reads the cover letter? And is that something that you as the hiring manager would see initially, or is that something that gets screened through the recruiter? Jason?
Yeah, I can speak for GoPuff. So yeah, the recruiter, I guess, sees the cover letter, but you know, unfortunately, I hate to say it, but a lot of the cover letters, you know, depending on the software, you know, we kind of like had some like software that I think made it kind of hard to see the cover letter, and that might be the reality for a lot of companies. They're using kind of suboptimal software for managing that stuff. So a lot of times it was actually I just wouldn't see a cover letter. So I would say make the resume kind of like, you know, as good as possible. You won't be able to supplement it with something in like a cover letter, at least for, you know, for GoPuff and maybe, you know, and probably other companies too.
Uday, did you have your hand up as well?
Yeah, so I think I typically read the cover letter. So we sit down with the recruiter, kind of go through the selection criteria, the filtering criteria, and if there is a cover letter, we kind of go through it, read it, and match it with the resume. And you know, I also the people who have a GitHub link, I go through their, you know, GitHub repository and I look at the code. And the way I evaluate the code is, you know, what is the level of complexity? And you can quickly tell if you're reading code at what level they are in that language and what level of expertise they are. So if you have a GitHub repository, but it's a very simple expose of what your expose or treatment of a problem, then it'll reveal what your skill level is. So you just have to be careful about that.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to the next question. What is the best, do you have any suggestions for how somebody submitting their application could make sure that theirs does not get lost in the black hole when submitted on a career website? Steve, I think I saw your hand first.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take this as an opportunity just to rep. Elastic does not use any software to screen their resumes, so I can guarantee you that if you apply, some human that is an employee will read it. So I think probably my best answer is try to find companies that will actually read your resume and apply there, because there are a lot of organizations that will kind of use software that maybe doesn't work very well at screening applications. They tend to be difficult to build some of those kind of that software that does that automated work. That said, I would think if you're applying to a very large company, maybe like 10,000 plus employees or more, it's probably a good idea to find a team or organization or subset that you can get looped into through a conference or local meetup or some other place, and find a human that you could actually meet and send a note through LinkedIn or otherwise find, and then they can often recommend good ways to get you past some of the software. Again, that would be for larger organizations that may be using those things.
Thank you. Ryan, did I see your hand as well?
Yeah, definitely. First, want to echo almost everything that Steve just said, actually. So one, just Compass Red's way smaller than a lot of the other companies represented here. So we're reading everyone's application in the first place. But I think the most important part is really the second piece of what he said. It's what are you doing ahead of applying to put yourself in the best position for someone to want to read your application? And that's networking, and not networking for a job, it's networking for relationships and building relationships. And slowly over time, you'll build up a network of people who are advocating for you and looking out for you. But it's all about getting to know a person ahead of time and what they're working on and understanding what they care about. And to me, that's how you get past a resume screen and get past the automated pieces. It's people, not algorithms.
I mean, if I could just butt in, I think this is
yeah, go ahead.
I mean, the non-traditional, like, people changing industries, gaps in resumes. I mean, all of these things I think are overcome with like strong referrals and like human relationships, because honestly, most of my, a lot of my jobs are mostly just like through someone referring me to a position, and it's just a different, in some cases, the interview process for some organizations is totally different for someone who is referred versus somebody who comes in, through a resume. So it's just a huge advantage to have those relationships and, to participate in organizations, like, these local organizations to meet people. So plug in that.
Robert, I think I saw your hand as well. Circle right back to you. Uday, I think I saw your hand as well. Do you want to add to what somebody can do to get through that black hole of the, interview submittal process?
Yeah, and I think
process.
At Eversana, we kind of read all the resumes. We don't have a screener, so we kind of read them. And so it's doing all the things that the panelists have mentioned so far is, putting in relevant experience, or if you don't, or if you're coming in from a different domain, build that bridge that shows that you have the relevant skills for the position posted. So I think that will get you through, like the first person who reads it, out to the right and the relevant groups.
Thank you. Robert, anything to add?
Same thing for us, like someone's going to review every applicant packet. And usually 2 people are reviewing every one of them. We have a short questionnaire that we also ask people to fill out, about asking them about some of their motivations and how they found us and things like that. Give some thought to that, right? Write a few sentences. We don't need a book, but 1-word answers will probably indicate that you're not really interested or haven't done your homework or haven't given any thought to the position, and has an impact on the people who see it.
Just want to make sure Jason, is your hand up as well? Just want to make sure I didn't miss anybody.
No.
Cool.
So.
All right, we'll move on to the next one. Does your organization post salary ranges for open positions? If not, do you have any suggestions for how applicants can bring up and have the salary discussion? Robert?
I will say that it's a hot topic of conversation inside our company. We have sometimes posted them for some positions. The challenge is that we do have salary ranges and role ladders, particularly for engineers. But when we post a position, we often just, like, we're looking for a great software engineer, and they may be entry level, and they may be mid-level, and they may be senior, and it's not like, if we give you a full range of all the possible salaries, it's just not very meaningful. For situations like that, we will ask you what your expectation is. We don't need to know what you're making now, or it's not really relevant for us. And we also invite people to ask the question early on. We're happy to share what our ranges are for the different ladders. But we'll sometimes include it where we have a specific position where we know we can set that and it's a meaningful number.
Elena, I think I saw your hand up next.
Yes. So with every position I've seen from Comcast, in particular, there is a range that's posted, but it's a very large range because it's basically covering everything from a data scientist 1 to a principal data scientist and maybe even higher. And so sometimes those ranges are, over $100,000 and they're not really going to tell you much. So that's a big thing to just keep in mind. If you come in there expecting the top, but you're a data scientist 1, nope, you got it wrong. But I will say that something that's important to do, I think, in every aspect that you can when it comes to pay, especially as a woman talking to other women, something I'm always hypersensitive about is, am I being paid like my peers? And so ask around, see what other people are making, see what other people are making in similar industries to you. in similar locations. I've used, I believe it's PayScale to kind of get an idea of what's acceptable. And then I've talked to fellow peers. I make a point to do as much research as I can to get a baseline. But I can tell you, especially for someone like me who came out of academia, I really had no idea what to expect. And sometimes I kind of, want to kick myself a little and say, well, why didn't you ask all your other friends who had just graduated and get what their salaries were? So ask around, but also have expectations of, if you have friends who are in California, making a California pay is going to be very different from a Philadelphia pay. So just have expectations, know when to lower them, know when to hire them, but do as much research as possible and ask around.
That's really good advice. Steve, you're up next.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, definitely second what folks are saying about it. I mean, for Elastic in particular, we hire in so many different geographies that it's very difficult to post any kind of salary ranges since we hire in multiple different countries for the same role. So we don't publish salary ranges, but a couple of things that I wanted to note kind of practically for folks that are working on applying is, I think Robert mentioned this and I'd second it, which is you will almost certainly have a recruiter ask you about your expectations. You should feel empowered to explain what your expectations are, but not tell them what you currently make right now. And I think that's something that I definitely recommend for folks. I have had this happen before to me in applying for jobs, and I'm sure that it continues to happen where recruiters will ask you what you currently make. I just recommend not answering that question, but answering them with your expectation instead, which I think is a much fairer kind of way to answer that. So that's kind of one practical recommendation I'd make for folks. And that's also a good chance for you to ask the likely recruiter would be who you're talking to at this point, but also the hiring manager as well, which is how the company sets salaries and the way in which they do fair pay analysis across their company as well. And so them asking you a question about what you currently make is actually a good opportunity for you to sort of turn it around and ask them about how they're actually setting the salary and where you get your offer. So there are a lot of, what in my opinion, legitimate reasons that a company may not have a clear salary range because of different geographies. Folks have mentioned how leveling can change things drastically during an interview. There's a lot of reasons where it may be hard to put a number on the job posting, but a company should be able to explain to you how they go about setting the salary and how they're ensuring that's fair.
Awesome, thank you. Anjali?
Yeah, I mean, Solemn does not post the salaries on our job postings, whether it's through our websites or LinkedIn postings or anything like that. But I mean, it's very much because of the reasons that have been mentioned already, right? As a global consulting firm, our ranges for the same position change by locale, by geography, by country. As well as, even though we may post for a, data scientist one or, data analyst one, as an individual is going through the recruiting process and the interview process, we may realize that they are better suited to an elevated level or perhaps as part of another practice. So that again also shifts what the salary composition and earning potential really look like.
Thank you. We are getting close to the time to go into breakout rooms, so I'm going to attempt to combine two questions from the audience here. There's a question about what is your preference between a candidate that is basically a jack of all trades, a breadth across optimization, simulation, probability, stats, deep learning, NLP, etc., versus specific, like very in-depth knowledge of one of them. And can you talk a little bit about the specific skills? Can you elaborate on the specific skills needed in the roles that you're looking for specifically? Ryan?
Sure. So if I'm hearing the question right, it's do I prefer a jack of all trades? So if someone's T-shaped versus just a line. And the answer is it depends, which is the most frustrating answer I could possibly give you, but it's the only one that makes sense. The reality is that what I'm hiring for is a great person. And really frequently, that means either one of those things. And it depends on the role. So sometimes I have a specific project in mind, and I need you to be an expert on Snowflake, because to answer the second part, we're trying to hire someone with Snowflake skills right now, and just that general skill set overall. Other times I'm looking for just someone who can be a great contributor and is going to get stuff done across a ton of different projects. And they're willing to jump in and learn, and you can see how they can grow and flourish in a lot of different ways. If you're either one of those people or somewhere in between, there's a place for you on every team. You just have to learn how to sell yourself and frame your skill set, which is definitely another theme of what we've heard throughout the night. Framing yourself is really valuable either way.
Thank you. Johanna?
So I'll add a little bit more to that too, in that sometimes, like my first role at Comcast, I needed to be a jack of all trades. That was an important part of what I did. Now I would argue that I'm more of a master of a very particular thing in terms of the business. And so sometimes that comes with experience. And I think some roles actually allow you to kind of laser focus and become what we call an SME, a subject matter expert on a particular thing. So right now for me, it's internet health, which is really cool, by the way, and I get to use physics, which is awesome. But I will say with all of that, sometimes when it comes to jobs, I would say having multiple different skills is generally a good thing. Showing the ability to learn is a really big part of it, and curiosity on something. Frankly, my internet health stuff just came from curiosity. And I think you'll kind of generally fit that. There's certain companies that allow you to kind of either be master of all or be master of one. And kind of just to Ryan's point again, like I can't give an exact answer because there are some companies that want you to be a very specific thing, but sometimes too, talking to people before you apply, like messaging someone on LinkedIn, they'll tell you like, we're looking for someone who cares only about NLP, that's it. And then you can say, okay, well, I'm gonna study that thing and I'm gonna show you. So it depends, but talk with people, kind of get a feel for what people want. If you can talk to people who are already in the company so they can get a feel of like, just like what Ryan was saying, like he's looking for someone for Snowflake, so I'm gonna study Snowflake, you know? So that's I think the big thing to do.
Thank you. Dave?
Sure, so I think it certainly does depend, and it will, I've never seen a job description that says that. So the job description will be a little bit more generic. So it's an opportunity for you to ask as you get into an interview, both with whether it's a screener or a hiring manager or a team member, ask more about what they're looking for, because that also presents an opportunity to know what you want and make sure that you're finding the right fit for everyone involved, whether you want to be more of a generalist or you really want to dive deep into one area. And I'm not sure what others have experienced here too, but from what I've seen, you might be able to make some early assumptions, but still ask, don't make a full assumption. That smaller to larger organizations will tend to follow certain paths, where smaller you might need to wear a lot more hats, where larger tends to get more specific depending on the team size, but that can have some variability if it's a new practice being developed. So for larger companies developing a data science team for the first time, that can be very different than one that's been established for 10 years and we're hiring for this specific thing.
Yes. I'll get right back to you, Robert. Udi, I think I saw your hand go up as well.
Sure, thank you. So we actually hire for tomorrow. So we know that everything is evolving, the models are evolving. Snowflake there may be another solution better than Snowflake tomorrow. But if somebody comes in with an expertise, how do they acquire that expertise? And what is their driving and motivating factor to acquire or be an expert in deep learning, for example? And then will that person drive the business forward in the future? So that's what we're really looking for in a candidate. Are they self-driven? Are they in what I call the latitude of decision making? And that latitude means is that beyond your scope or your job description, will you make decisions or take on risk beyond that? And that's the kind of candidate we're really looking for, because those are the candidates that will, an individual can really grow a business based on their attitude and that ability to take risk, make decisions.
Thank you. Robert, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, people have said other things about it depends on the role. I would say we'd like to see people who are willing to learn deeply about things. That's not, if you're interviewing for a DevOps or infrastructure engineering role, I'd rather see you have learned deeply about one of AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud Platform, but probably not all three. The likelihood that you know one of them deeply is pretty low. If you're a software developer, you've learned deeply about a programming language and a JavaScript framework. That may mean you know a smattering of others, but if all you know is a smattering of others, that's less attractive than the fact that you've had the commitment to learn deeply about something.
Thank you so much. I am going to call it. I think that it's about 7:30. It'll take us a minute to set up the breakout rooms. Thank you all for all of your answers to the audience today. If the audience can just give a quick round of applause with the reactions, I think we can all get into our breakout rooms and talk to everybody a little bit more deeply.
Thank you, Jesse.